The Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, said, "Whoever believes in Allah and the last day, let him speak good or remain silent." That's one of the most quoted hadith in Islamic tradition. And somehow, despite knowing it, most of us still open our mouths when we shouldn't. We defend when we should pause. We explain when we should let the silence do its work. We fill space with words when the most powerful response available to us was simply nothing. Silence is not passive, it is not weakness. In the tradition of the Prophet, peace be upon him, silence was a deliberate, disciplined, deeply intentional practice. It was wielded by the wisest, the most spiritually mature, the most emotionally intelligent people as a tool that most of us have never learned to pick up. This video is about 5 situations in which silence is not just acceptable but actively the right Islamic response. 5 situations where the mouth should close, the tongue should rest, and something far more powerful than words should speak. 1. When you are angry. The Prophet, peace be upon him, gave us what might be the simplest and most ignored piece of advice in all of Islamic guidance. If one of you becomes angry, let him be silent. Ahmad. Simple sentence. Devastating difficulty to practice. Here's the truth about anger that most people don't want to sit with. When you are genuinely angry, not mildly irritated, but that specific heat that rises up and tightens your chest and makes your mind suddenly very creative about what it wants to say, you are not capable of your best thinking. You are not capable of your most accurate assessment of the situation. You are not capable of words you won't regret. What you are capable of in that moment is saying something that feels completely justified and turns out to be deeply damaging. Anger narrows perception. It presents you with a version of reality that is real but incomplete. You feel the wrong that was done. You feel the heat of that feeling. And every word you might produce right now will be shaped by that heat rather than by the fuller truth of the situation. The things that seemed important before the anger will not factor in. The person's history of goodness with you will not factor in. Your own contributions to the tension will not factor in. Only the heat will factor in. And heat produces words that burn. The Prophet, peace be upon him, understood something about human psychology that modern neuroscience has only recently confirmed. The emotional centers of the brain, when activated at high intensity, literally reduce access to the prefrontal cortex, the part responsible for judgment, long-term thinking, and compassion. When you're in the grip of real anger, you are biologically not at your best. You are temporarily a less wise version of yourself. Silence is the bridge back to yourself. The pause, even just a minute, even just the act of choosing not to speak, creates the gap between stimulus and response in which wisdom can re-enter. It gives your nervous system time to settle. It gives your mind time to access the parts of the situation that anger was blocking. And it prevents the most common outcome of anger, words that you can never fully take back, that leave marks on relationships that don't fully heal. The Prophet described true strength not as the ability to overpower others physically, but as the ability to control oneself in the moment of anger. This is the highest form of strength, not strength over others, strength over the self. When you choose silence in anger, you are not suppressing, you are leading. You are saying, my response will be shaped by my values, not by my current emotional state. That choice, made consistently over a lifetime, is what builds the kind of character Islam asks us to build. The practical application is immediate and available to you in any moment. Notice the anger rising. Don't speak. Breathe. If you need to remove yourself from the room, remove yourself. Make wudu if you can. Pray 2 rakats if the moment allows. And when the heat has reduced, when you can feel that the sharpest edge of the feeling has settled, only then do you decide whether words are necessary. Often you'll find they aren't. 2. When someone else is being discussed unjustly, this is the one that requires a different kind of courage. Not the courage to stay quiet when you want to speak. The courage to stay quiet or to redirect when you're not the one speaking and the conversation itself is going somewhere it shouldn't. Gossip is one of the most socially acceptable sins in the world. It arrives in the form of concern, of sharing information, of just being honest about someone's behavior. It flows easily. It creates connection between the people doing it, and it feels natural in a way that most sins don't, which is exactly what makes it dangerous. The Prophet, peace be upon him, defined backbiting ghibah with a precision that leaves no comfortable gray area. It is to mention your brother in a way he would dislike Muslim. Not lies, not fabrications. Simply saying true things about someone in their absence that they would not want said. And then there is buhtan, slander, which is saying things that are not even true, which the Quran describes in language so intense, it should make anyone who has ever slandered someone stop and genuinely reflect. Would one of you like to eat the flesh of his dead brother? You would detest it. Surah Al-Hujurat 49:12. The question of silence in this context is, what do you do when you're in a conversation and it begins to turn this way? You have options. You can redirect, find a natural way to change the subject without making it a confrontation. You can say something like, let's not get into this, simply and without drama. In some cases, if the person being discussed is being genuinely wronged, you can defend them. And if none of those feel possible in that moment, if the social dynamic is too complex or you don't have the confidence yet, you can simply disengage. Stop contributing. Go quiet. Let the conversation happen without your participation and without your fuel. What silence does in gossip situations is refuse to be an audience. Gossip requires listeners. It feeds on the engagement of the people hearing it, the reactions, the questions, the expressed surprise or agreement. When you withdraw that fuel, you take away some of the oxygen the conversation was burning. And there is something else at stake beyond the immediate conversation. Every time you stay silent in the face of gossip, every time you don't add to it, don't encourage it, don't validate it with your interest, you protect something in yourself. You protect the purity of your own relationship with Allah. You maintain the kind of character that doesn't trade in other people's reputations for the social comfort of belonging to the group conversation. The person who consistently refuses to engage in gossip becomes, over time, someone others trust. If they know you won't speak badly of them behind their back because they've watched you stay silent when the opportunity was there, that trust is worth more than any momentary belonging gossip conversation provides. 3. When the argument has no end that matters, there is a specific type of conflict that Islam addresses with particular directness, not conflict that needs resolution, not disagreement that involves genuine stakes, but the pointless, ego-driven, pride-fueled argument, the one that has no useful destination and that will continue as long as both parties keep feeding it. The Prophet, peace be upon him, offered something remarkable. I guarantee a house in the middle of Jannah for the one who abandons arguing even when he is right. Abu Dawud. Even when he is right. This verse stops people because we have been trained to believe that being right means you should say your piece, that truth deserves defense, that letting someone's wrong statement stand unanswered is a kind of defeat. But the Prophet is pointing at something deeper than the content of the argument. He's pointing at the psychology underneath it. Why are you still arguing? Is it because the truth hasn't been communicated yet? Or is it because your pride hasn't been satisfied? Is it because something important is at stake? Or because walking away feels like losing? Most arguments that extend past the point of productive exchange are being sustained by ego, not truth. The truth has already been said. Both parties have heard each other's positions. What keeps the argument alive after that point is not concern for truth, but concern for not appearing wrong, not concern for the other person, but concern for your own sense of dignity. Silence in that moment, the silence of someone who has said what needed to be said and refuses to continue past that point, is not weakness. It's the disciplined refusal to let your ego run your tongue. It's the recognition that the argument no longer serves truth or relationship, and that continuing it only serves pride. There is also something powerful that happens in conflict when one person goes quiet. It changes the dynamic immediately. An argument requires two participants. When one withdraws genuinely, without the performance of angry silence, but with actual composed disengagement, the conflict loses its structure. The other person is suddenly arguing with nothing. And that experience often forces a kind of reflection that the argument itself never could. This doesn't mean silence in conflict is always appropriate. There are situations where conflict needs to be engaged, where something important is being established, where a wrong genuinely needs to be confronted, where the relationship requires the hard conversation. The skill is in knowing the difference when the conflict is serving something real and when it has become a vehicle purely for ego. Islam calls us to be people who can make that distinction in real time and act accordingly. That is a form of wisdom that develops through practice, through choosing silence in the right moments and building the discipline to know which moments those are. 4. When your words could wound more than help. There are situations where what you want to say is true, where your assessment is accurate, where you could make a very good case for why what you're about to say is justified. And yet something in you should pause before saying it, because the question is not only is this true, but what will this do? This is the practice of weighing consequences, the specific Islamic ethical question of whether a true word said at this moment, in this way, to this person will serve good or create harm. The tongue in Islamic teaching is one of the most powerful and most dangerous instruments a person possesses. The Prophet, peace be upon him, was asked what was most likely to cause people to enter hellfire, and he touched his tongue and said this, Tirmidhi, not actions of the hand, not sins of the eye. The tongue, the thing we use so casually, so constantly, so thoughtlessly. Words land differently depending on the moment. The same truth delivered when someone is ready to hear it can produce genuine change. The same truth delivered when someone is broken, defensive, or already struggling can produce only damage, not because the truth is wrong, but because the timing and the manner convert it from medicine to wound. Silence in these moments is not cowardice. It's not dishonesty. It is the wisdom to recognize that your role right now is not to be right, it is to be useful. And if your words, however accurate, will not be useful in this moment, if they will be received as attack rather than care, if they will close a person down rather than open them up, if they will serve your need to say the thing more than the other person's need to hear it, then silence is the more truthful response. There is also the matter of permanence. Words cannot be unsaid. The apology can come later, the regret can be expressed, the relationship can eventually recover, but the words themselves remain. They live in memory, and in the memory of the person who received them, your words are permanently attached to who they understand you to be. This makes the calculation before speaking in high-stakes emotional moments critical. Not every thought needs to become a sentence. Not every sentence needs to be delivered today. Some things are better held until the relationship has the capacity to receive them without damage. The Prophet, peace be upon him, never spoke carelessly. Those who observed him described his speech as measured, purposeful, free of excess. He did not fill silence with unnecessary words. He did not express Every judgment that passed through his mind, he was extraordinarily selective about what he said. And this selectivity was itself a form of wisdom, a recognition that speech is an intervention in another person's reality, and interventions should be considered before they are made. Ask before you speak in loaded moments. Will this word build something or break something? Will this serve the person in front of me or serve my own need to say it? The answer will guide you more reliably than the impulse alone. 5. When you need to hear what you can only hear in the quiet. The Prophet, peace be upon him, would retreat to the cave of Hira before his prophethood. He would go alone, in the dark, away from the noise of Mecca, away from commerce and conversation and the endless stimulation of daily life. He would sit with himself and with whatever he was reaching toward. And it was in that silence that revelation came. This is not a coincidence embedded in prophetic history as a one-time event. This is a pattern. This is how it works. The deepest things, the most important realizations, the clearest self-knowledge, the most genuine closeness to Allah happen in stillness, not in noise. Silence as a spiritual practice, tafakkur, deep reflection, is described in the Quran as an act of worship. The people of understanding, the ulul albab, are those who remember Allah standing, sitting and lying on their sides and reflect on the creation of the heavens and the earth. Surah Al-Imran 3 to 191. Reflect, not only act, not only perform rituals, but sit, think, contemplate, listen. We have built lives that are architecturally opposed to this. The phone is nearby. The notification arrives. The next piece of content is always available. We have learned to be uncomfortable in silence because we've spent years training that discomfort out of ourselves, reaching for a screen every time quiet arrives, filling space before it can ask anything of us. And we've paid a price for this. Not just in productivity or mental clarity, though those costs are real. We've paid a price in self-knowledge, in the depth of our relationship with Allah, in the ability to hear our own conscience clearly enough to act on it. When you sit in silence, real silence, chosen and sustained, several things begin to happen. The mental noise that you were running from when you reached for the phone gradually diminishes. Thoughts that were too quiet to hear in the din of regular life begin to surface. Questions you've been avoiding become visible. A sense of your actual state spiritually, emotionally, in terms of what you truly need becomes accessible. And if you're reaching toward Allah in that silence, making dhikr, reciting Quran, sitting in dua, something else becomes available. A quality of closeness that is simply not accessible when you're busy. A sense of being heard and known that doesn't come through activity but through presence. The Prophet, peace be upon him, also told us, the closer a servant is to his Lord is in his prostration. Muslim. Sujud, the position of absolute physical smallness before absolute greatness. The head to the ground, the ego set aside, the performance suspended, just a person and their creator. That quality of presence, the soul's full attention directed toward Allah with nothing else competing, is what silence makes possible. And without deliberate practice of silence, it becomes increasingly difficult to access in a world engineered to capture your attention and never release it. Make the practice specific. Set aside time that is genuinely quiet, not ambient silence while you do something else, but dedicated, intentional stillness. No phone, no background audio, no agenda beyond being present. Use it to reflect on your day, your heart, your closeness to or distance from Allah. Make it regular enough that it becomes a form of spiritual maintenance rather than something you turn to only in crisis. What you will begin to hear in those quiet moments will not always be comfortable. Sometimes you'll hear things about yourself that you'd prefer not to know. But that discomfort is exactly the kind of information that growth requires. You cannot correct what you cannot see, and you cannot see clearly while you're always moving. Silence is how you see yourself. Silence is how you hear Allah. And silence, practiced with intention and regularity, becomes the foundation of a spiritual life with real depth rather than just consistent activity. The thread running through all five. Look at these five situations together and you'll notice what they share. Each one is a place where the tongue's first impulse is to speak. In anger, you want to defend. In gossip, you want to participate. In conflict, you want to win. Before potentially wounding words, you want to release them. And in the noise of daily life, you want to fill the silence rather than inhabit it. And in each case, Islam asks you to do something that cuts against the immediate impulse. To pause, to withhold, to choose deliberately and consciously the harder response. This is not incidental. This is what distinguishes the spiritually mature Muslim from the spiritually average one. Not knowledge, not even frequency of worship, but this specific quality of self-governance. The ability to be in full possession of your tongue. To decide when it speaks and when it rests. To use it as the Prophet, peace be upon him, used his, with intention, with precision, with full awareness of its power to build or to destroy. The Prophet's hadith bears returning to: whoever believes in Allah and the last day, let him speak good or remain silent. This is not advice for monks. It's not advice for people with spare time who can afford to be thoughtful. It's advice for every Muslim in every situation on any given ordinary day. Speak good or be silent. Two options. Only two. Not speak your mind or say what you feel or let people know where you stand. Speak good or be silent. Most of us speak a third category constantly, words that are neither harmful enough to feel obviously wrong nor helpful enough to clearly justify. Just filler, just habit, just the sound of an untrained tongue moving, because movement is what it knows. The discipline Islam asks for is more demanding than that. It asks for a tongue that is